Jennifer Moeller, costume designer for Dickinson. Season 2 is on Apple TV Plus right now. An inside look at the world of writer and poet Emily Dickinson. Jennifer, I think this season is a lot maybe bigger, let's say, or it feels like there were a lot more opportunities for more elaborate costumes. I guess, what were your goals going between season 1 and season 2, and how you would evolve the look of the show?
Well, I think that one of the biggest changes is that the entire cast has sort of grown up a little bit from season 1. And so their clothes sort of reflect that. They're dealing with more young adult problems rather than sort of more teens problems. So all their clothes have grown up a little bit. Their shapes have changed a little bit as we've been inching toward the 60s, the 1860s. I think the biggest change probably is in Sue's character. She goes from this, poor orphan in season 1 who only has a handful of dresses to this sort of glamorous socialite who never wears the same dress twice and is throwing all these soirees. And so I think that was sort of one of the biggest arcs of this season. But also the scope of the show really did expand. Season 1 was really sort of contained to the family's home, the homestead, and the town of Amherst. And season 2 sort of goes everywhere. We go to the spa, we go to the opera. So we just sort of blow up, get bigger.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up Sue. I thought her evolution is really, obviously, like you said, very apparent in season 2. I guess, getting to, dress her character in Ella Hunt, the actress, I guess, can you talk a little about like what kind of freedoms that allowed you? Because like you said, she doesn't wear the same thing twice. She's obviously much more of like maybe a celebrity or whatever you want to call it, socialite, like you said. Like I found that it's just a great evolution, especially from season 1 when she was in mourning and wearing kind of like very drab clothing to what we see in season 2. I guess, can you talk about the opportunity there to like kind of really lighten that up?
Sure. We get to really move forward a little bit in the period. Season 1 is a little more rooted in the early 50s, and now we're sort of moving again toward the 1860s. During the 1850s and 1860s, there is this publication that was put out of Philadelphia called Godey's Ladies' Book, which was one of the early magazines, so to speak, women's magazines. And there are all these beautiful fashion plates in them. And we didn't really get to use that so much season 1 because this is Amherst. It's a small town in Western Mass. But this season I got to look at those and use those for Sue's looks and go into more sumptuous shapes and beautiful fabrics and trims. But we get to really sort of just go whole hog with everything, which was super fun.
Yeah. Can you talk about it? Like, obviously the show is a period piece, but there is such a modern edge to it from the dialogue and obviously the soundtrack and the music and everything. Can you talk about how you reflect that in the costumes? Like, obviously it's period wardrobe and stuff, but like you try to make it like add modern flourishes to it when you're like, concepting these things.
Sure. I mean, truly, I really do design to be as accurate as possible in the period. I start with the period. I look at the real period clothes and what's happening in the world at the time, because context is sort of everything. And my hope is that when the viewer is watching, you think you're in the 1850s, 1860s. I'm not trying to bump us out of there, because I do think that the contrast, the sort of play between the contemporary and the period is really the joy of Dickinson. So I am trying to put it there. That said, I definitely take a lot of liberties. I definitely am trying to appeal to the modern eye wherever possible. Fabrics are one way that I do that. I do some fabrics that feel like the period, but maybe have a little more modern sensibility to it. I think I'm hoping viewers will take this and take it and see that we're in the 1850s, but I think purists or people with a more trained eye are going to know that I've definitely, there's a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah, no, that's good though. You mentioned like your research before. Like, I guess, can you talk a little more about the research and how deep you go? Like, are you looking at archival photo? Like, how are you looking to get the period and like understand it better? I guess.
Well, first, fortunately, this right around now is when photography becomes a lot more accessible, right? So there's a ton of early photographs, daguerreotypes, and that sort of thing. So I can go directly to primary research, which is always the best. We look at real clothes. I went to the There's a museum in Deerfield, Massachusetts, right near Amherst, and they have a collection of real clothes from the period in the area. So I looked at those. I went to the Dickinson homestead just to spend some time there, speak with the staff. Emily had this book in which she collected pressed flowers that she had found in her walks or travels. And that was something that really spoke to me, especially when choosing her fabrics, looking for florals and ways to connect her to nature, and that sort of stuff. But yeah, and I also reading about the family. There's quite a bit of documentation about the life of the family. There's not many images of them, but quite a lot about their life and some of their relationships, and also just trying to understand again the context. Like the printing press is invented right around now. So how does that affect what's accessible, what they're seeing? So Sue can get Godey's Lady's Book and see those Parisian and Venetian and European fashions that she can aspire to. What's happening with the trade routes. There's new trade routes bringing cottons from India. And how does that inform what they're wearing? Or even later as the war begins, how is that going to limit what's available to them, and how does that inform what they're wearing? So I really take all of that, pack it up, sift it through sort of sieve of what feels right for Dickinson, and then hopefully it all comes together.
No, I think it really. You mentioned the flowers. It's interesting because I think I forget which episode it is. I apologize, but I think she's going when she's walking through the hedge maze and she has this yellow floral dress on, and it's like really very beautiful. And it's like obviously like I'm imagining that you kind of were inspired by those pressed flowers in the book.
Yeah, exactly. And also each episode is tied to a particular poem. Mm-hmm. Of course, I should mention you definitely go back to the poems and start there.
Yeah.
And I often will look at the poem that's attached to that episode and see, what I can pull from it or how I can relate the clothes to that. And in that particular episode that you're mentioning, it's all about the daisy and the sun. And so, hence the yellow.
There you go. The other episode I want to talk about, I think it's episode 6, is Split the Lark. You have the big opera scene. I guess, and it's very lavish. I think, and it just seems like a lot of opportunity for the costumes to shine. I guess, can you talk a little about like that? Is that something where you're looking at old opera performances and stuff from the era, or like how are you because you're dressing like the soprano and stuff, and obviously Emily and Sue and all the characters. I guess, can you talk a little about that episode and that sequence?
Sure. I mean, that episode was really one that's very close to me because I began in opera. I began my career working in opera. So it was really super fun to go back. And also because I never thought that the Dickinsons would end up at the opera. It's an opportunity to do something different than we do with the family in general, but also like making sure all those choices are character driven, so Lavinia is in this like explosion of raspberry ruffles. It's like, it's the opera. So it's bigger, everything's bigger. So we can take all these things that we do and pump them up like the ruffles. Emily is wearing this sort of really beautiful midnight blue velvet gown, which is sort of a nod to David Lynch and Blue Velvet, because this episode has a very sort of non-linear storytelling, and there's all this music which invokes emotion and imagery and that sort of thing. And then there's the opera singer, and relating that to Sue, finding a way to tie that to Sue so that when we go into this sort of imaginary space, there's a visual link between Violetta and Sue. It's scripted that the scene on stage is very much reminiscent of the salons that we saw in the first episode. So I took great care to make sure that there were people on stage who reminded us of the folks that we saw in that first episode. Like there's a widow there, sort of like Jane Humphrey, wearing all black, that sort of thing.
That's great. And I guess the last one, not to just keep picking through episodes, but the other, you mentioned the spa one earlier, I think, and I guess, how did you decide on the towels to put them all in? I just found that it's like they're in like a gray kind of like Turkish towel almost, I guess, and I was like, oh, this is it just looks so good. I guess you just talk about like how you decided on that.
The spa is the one place where I'm sort of making stuff up a little bit. I mean, they didn't have spas as we know it today. They had places where you could go to get the water cure. I don't know. It was like a very dirty world. So I think anywhere where you could go and drink clean water and sit and take a bath was fantastic. But it wasn't what you saw. These water cures. It wasn't exactly that. They were actually sort of torturous experiences. I think sometimes too, was sort of where the jokes come from. But I kind of just based that on underwear. The objective was to make it feel like a contemporary spa, and they all had little uniforms, like we were at Spa Castle or something like that. But again, that's like a place where I definitely took a lot of liberties. They did not, have the uniforms that they wore when they went to the spa.
No, but it still works with the show, and it's really great. Jennifer Moeller, thank you so much. Dickinson season 2 on Apple TV Plus. Stick around. We'll do the group panel after the rest of the interviews. Thank you. Appreciate it.